Welcome to FounderLine, the show where you get your questions about startups answered. I'm your host, Joe Beninato. It's great to have you with us today. Thanks for joining us. Our goal with FounderLine is to provide a forum for people who are interested in startups to get their questions answered. So whether you're a founder who's working on a startup and you have something you want to chat about, or you're thinking about joining a startup and you want to learn more about them, or maybe you're thinking of starting your own company. In any of those cases, we'd love to hear from you. You can get in touch with us, and we'll see if we can help you out. So the way to reach us, we're doing a live show, which is always a little dangerous, but the ways to reach us are by calling. So you can call toll-free 1-844-4FOUNDER, and we'll put you on the air if you call us. You can email us at help@founderline.com. You can tweet to @FounderLine on Twitter. And if you're worried about being anonymous, you can also go to our website, and there's a form there where you can submit a question as well. So with that, let's get started. Our guest today is Geoff Ralston, who is a founder at Imagine K12 and a partner at Y Combinator. Geoff and I have known each other for a very long time, since his 411 days, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. For those who don't know, 411 was a company started in the mid-90s that had a product called Rocket Mail that Yahoo acquired and became Yahoo Mail. And Geoff served as VP of Engineering at Yahoo and later as the Chief Product Officer as well. He went on to become the CEO of LaLa Media, which was acquired by Apple. And he then went on to start Imagine K12, which is a great incubator / accelerator in the education technology space, and also joined Y Combinator. So Geoff, welcome. It's great to have you on FounderLine today.
Great to be here, Joe.
So I usually like to start off just so people can get to know you a little bit, find out a little bit more beyond the what I just mentioned in the intro. Maybe we can go back to 411. And our intro was, I interviewed there for a job. I didn't get the job. I must have really pissed you guys off somehow, but we stayed in touch over there. You'll tell me later.
Yeah, I'll tell you later what happened.
Yeah, what happened. But 411 originally was a people directory, right?
Yeah, it was a people search. 411, like dialing 411 on your phone. And in fact, we had the domain FOUR11, and everyone called us 411, which was highly traumatic to us. But back in the day, you weren't allowed to have domains starting with a number,
yeah.
411. But that's what we were all about. We were about being the place you would go on the internet to find people, because it seemed to us that the internet was going to be a communications medium as much as any other kind of medium.
And you were right, it turns out.
Well, we were right, and we pivoted to doing web-based email, Rocket Mail, in the very, very late part of 1996, early part of 97, and it went really well, and we were purchased by Yahoo 8 months later in October of 1997.
Yeah, that was awesome. I mean,
it was fun.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Santullo is a great guy. And
yeah,
Katie Middick.
Mike Santullo, Katie Middick, Larry Drebus were all key players at 411, and it was a crazy, amazing time right back in the very beginning era of the internet connected world.
And I don't know if I've ever told you this, but 411 getting bought by Yahoo is one of the reasons we did when.com, because we said, oh, this web-based email stuff is pretty hot. What else is in Outlook that you might need
right.
someday? So contacts was already
Sure.
being done by a couple of companies, but nobody was really doing calendar very well. And then we reconnected on Calendar when you were back at Yahoo. So
many years later, right?
So Yahoo buys you guys, and you were there almost 10 years, right?
Yeah, 9 years really, yeah.
And through a period of amazing growth. I mean, through the ups and the downs with Yahoo. So.
It was a ride. It was a roller coaster.
Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, it was a great time for the internet as well as for Yahoo. So what was that like?
It was crazy. I remember back in the early days of the internet, of the web, I should say, driving around Palo Alto with my girlfriend, my then girlfriend, now wife, and whenever there would be a URL on you'd see URLs every now and then just sitting, in either on a sign somewhere,
park bench,
or a park bench or something. I'd like elbow her and say, "Look, it's real." This is
with the HTTP.
Yeah,
still on
HTTP
it, right?
colon slash. And she'd say, "Yeah, right." And I guess we believed, but we didn't know. And then slowly over those early years, especially at Yahoo, as Yahoo grew, and we saw the numbers of people, almost millions of people every week coming into Yahoo and joining and becoming part of the game. It became clear that this was something that was secular, that was real, that was actually changing the world the way we wanted to change the world, and hoped that what we were doing would change the world.
Yeah, no, it was a fun time, and to this day, I mean, I still keep in touch with Dave Nakayama and Katie and a bunch of and you.
I left off Dave from Yahoo Mail or 4-in-1 days, of course, but yeah, and Dave's got a big job now at Amazon doing great stuff.
Yeah, people are
in music, believe it or not,
finally,
which is crazy.
Finally.
He's always loved music. I warned him away from it, but he still went and took a great job at Amazon.
And then after Yahoo, I think you took a little time off, and then.
Well, I started angel investing right away.
Yeah.
Actually, that's when I loved the startup scene, and the way I reconnected with it after leaving Yahoo was to do a whole lot of angel investing and learned a whole lot about angel investing and about startup companies, or maybe relearned some of it. And so I did a lot of that before joining LaLa, which was one of my first angel investments. I was the founding investor,
and then became CEO.
And then I was always on the board, and Bill Wynn leaned on me to become CEO, and I accepted.
Awesome. And then
not knowing anything about the music space, which was why I accepted.
Maybe that was helpful. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe.
And then acquired by Apple. Like how does something like that come about? Did they? There's big Apple Music acquisition yesterday, right? So you
Beats,
were one of the early
we were
ones.
slightly smaller.
Yeah.
than that. Well, we had a relationship with Eddie Q for a while, and there was this serendipitous time for 4-in-1 when we became we had exclusive deals with both Google as Google Music and with Facebook as the first music player in their new online store. And so 4-in-1 looked really good at the time, and we sort of, we hit it while it was hot. We thought that was probably the maximum time of value for LaLa. So we talked to a bunch of companies, and there were a bunch of offers on the table, and we ended up going with Apple.
Awesome. Well, that's.
It was exciting. It was great going. I got my sort of moment in time with Steve Jobs before he passed, which was a dream come true for me. Really, we got to go to his house, and he sold us on Apple before they bought us, which was really cool. And I got to have a couple of meetings with him as well, which was fantastic.
That's amazing. Everyone who's spent time with him. He had his rough edges sometimes as well, but
I have lots of. I mean, he was funny. He was funny as hell. I mean, he was great, but definitely acerbic, but definitely as pointed a conversation as you'd ever have with someone. It was great.
Awesome. And now, so started Imagine K12 a number of years ago now. What, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, and Y Combinator as well. So. Talk about what's keeping you busy and what's happening now.
Well, actually, I said I went into angel investing when I left Yahoo, but immediately after I left, I wanted to do an Edtech startup. And I got together with a couple of folks, including Sebastian Thrun, who's now the CEO of Udacity, and tried to figure out what Edtech startup to do, because we really believe that education ought to be changed by all the things we've been working on with the internet. And we had a hard time coming up with what we could do. We beat our heads against the wall for 3 months, but the infrastructure wasn't ready for EdTech then. So we all went off and did different things. Sebastian went back to Google. I went on and did angel investing. And after I sold LaLa to Apple, and I was thinking about what I was going to do next, I came back to education. And I was spending a lot of time talking to Paul Graham. And sort of it all came together at the same time, where we had the idea of what if we had a vertically focused accelerator on educational technology, and we asked Paul, and Paul said that's a great idea, and you should be a partner here too, and we'll work together, and I'll show you how to set up an accelerator for success. And my partner Tim Brady, who was the first employee, somewhat arguable, but I say the first employee at Yahoo, and I worked together forever, and a third guy, Alan Louie. founded Imagine K12 at the same time as I became a partner at YC and became sort of fully embedded in the startup community and in the very early stage company financing and startups.
Awesome. Well, hopefully that gives everyone a good overview, and let's see if we can help a few people out. So once again, if you have questions for us, 1-844-4FOUNDER is the number. Email us to help@founderline.com or tweet to @founderline. So let's see. I think we have a call here. So let me go ahead and bring in Hong. There we go. Hong, do you have a question for Geoff?
Yeah, sure. So I know your background. Thanks for sharing the stories behind some of the companies you've been involved with.
Sure.
I used to work in Edtech myself, and what I've noticed is, the accelerator model versus the big VC model. Everybody's talking about these billion-dollar startups or billion-dollar exits or billion-dollar valuations. How come we haven't seen any kind of big successes in the educational space? Is it just a matter of time, or is it just a different motivation? Should we not be judged by that metric when working in education?
Yeah, why haven't we seen big exit in the EdTech space?
Yeah,
and it's a question I think about a lot, but I'm not concerned. Imagine K12 was founded 3 years ago, and if you think about it, one way to look at Y Combinator, who is looked at is clearly by far and away the most successful accelerator. There hasn't been a huge exit yet for Y Combinator. Dropbox and Airbnb, the biggest companies, haven't actually exited yet. It takes a long time. So 3 years is really just not enough time. And it's only recently, I would argue, that the EdTech landscape, the EdTech infrastructure, the infrastructure in education as a whole in the United States and around the world has been ready for EdTech. So I think we have to give it more time. I think you will see big EdTech exits. I think you'll see some very successful companies in the space. But yes, to your point, I would argue that we're gonna have to be patient, and we're gonna have to let the system work its way through the educational system. Let these companies work their way through the educational system to get the scale necessary for a big exit.
Awesome. That's great. We're getting some tweets and emails as well. So a tweet just came in from HI. It says, MOOCs will be the biggest thing to hit the developing world. Remind me what MOOC stands for. It's massively open online course. Okay, there you go. So it's the online course.
It's what Sebastian's doing at Udacity, teaching a course. Well, I mean, it's what we were talking about when I left Yahoo in 2006. It's like, shouldn't a course of a really fantastic teacher be able to reach more than 20 or 40 or 50 or even 100 people at a time? Why not 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 or 10 million? Why not? What's the barrier? And once you have a connected world, that barrier disappears and the world actually becomes very interesting.
Well, so the question is, will be the biggest thing hitting the developing world, but there's the problem of broadband penetration, which is low. So what are the plans to solve this issue? Interesting. I don't know if you have that all figured out yet, but
yeah, I don't think the broadband issue. I don't think that the availability of broadband will be the barrier. Now, okay, so there's a lot of kinds of online education, and what's really interesting is that, think of it this way: all of the content in the world is now essentially all of the content, all knowledge, all information is online. What's happening? It's becoming consumable. It's being broken down and thought of in a way that you can consume as a learner. That's what the Khan Academy is all about. And look, a lot of that content is video, and there will be some broadband needs there, and I can address that at a very superficial level as what's happening in the developing world. But there's all sorts of content available that you don't really need broadband for, which is going to change the world for folks. When the billion children who are in primary school get access to the best educational content there is, simply because they have access to a smartphone, that's a game changer. Now, there's a lot of efforts. One way to look at broadband is, in the end, there's going to be leapfrogging done in the third world, just like they did with cell phones. Forget landlines. Who needs a landline? Well, I think you can forget fiber in a lot of cases and go right to wireless technologies that will allow them to get broadband anywhere they are in their countries. And Google's doing some really cool things here. There's other folks, but with this Loon project, where they're going to have internet access available around the world via essentially weather balloons. But there's a lot of efforts like that, and I think you will see very rapid adoption and availability of broadband everywhere in the world, or everywhere, everywhere. Maybe too big a word, but very, very broadly throughout the world.
Great. Okay, we have an email from Patrick in Redwood City. As more and more schools are looking to integrate entrepreneurship education into their curriculum, what is the opportunity in the Edtech space to provide new ways of nurturing basic entrepreneurial traits among K through 12 or even college-age students?
Yeah, that's a good but hard question. I'd have to think about that for a while. But what I can say is the vast majority of EdTech companies we see are focused around software. Mark Andreessen famously said software is going to eat the world, or is eating the world. And it's eating the educational world too. And as we get kids more and more involved in software, they're going to become part of this secular trend towards entrepreneurship, towards the founding of new companies. And I think those two will go together. And I think in the EdTech community, we can just get that software out there, get the knowledge of software, and get the knowledge of the possibility of starting companies, of learning how to do what it takes to build things.
That's great. I know, we both have kids, and one of the really interesting things is when they ask me about entrepreneurship and startups, right? Because that's essentially been my entire career, is doing startups.
Right.
And you can see that kids today are much more programmed and knowledgeable about how software gets developed and what's happening, and 2-year-olds playing games on iPads, right? I mean, amazing stuff going on.
A company called Codable out of Imagine K12 is an iPad app for kids from 5 to 8 years old to teach them programming concepts.
Oh, really? With a special language of some sort, or visual programming?
It's a visual paradigm that teaches you flow of control, variables, assignments, things like that, even debugging. So they can actually come away from it and sort of get what a program really means and what an algorithm really is.
That's awesome.
It's very cool.
All right. Well, we're going to move on to another question here. This one's a little bit long, so I'll paraphrase. It's from Cicero in Santa Monica. So we've got some LA people coming in. So he says, let's say I have something as good as Dropbox, but I'm not nearly as polished a person as Drew Houston. Houston?
Drew Houston.
I'm not 1600 SAT MIT alum. I'm much less educated. I can't keep my mouth shut. Blah blah blah. So he's hedging a little bit. But I've been hacking since I was a kid. I was a kid doing something amazingly great. I'm working with a co-founder I've known my whole life. My co-founder is relatively inexperienced. But they want to do this startup. So given my constraints, what is the best possible way I can go about trying to raise a small amount of money? So has an interesting idea, he thinks. A little bit of a crowded space, you might say, but what would you suggest to somebody in that situation?
Apply to Y Combinator. What are your constraints? It's an online application that's free. So apply. There's nothing to lose in applying. You might learn something. And by the way, there's so much information online about what constitutes a successful Y Combinator application. Just apply. Now, raising a small fund when you have no track record and maybe not great stats or maybe not great contacts, that, without an accelerator like Y Combinator to help you out, you're relegated to finding an angel who falls in love with you and your idea.
Yeah.
And I really need to stress that first part. They need to fall in love with you, because the key determinant of success for a startup is you, the founder. It's the team. Whatever your idea is now, it's likely to change fairly radically between now and when you actually become a multi-billion-dollar company. So it's really all about whether you have a team that's smart enough, passionate enough, determined enough to make it through all the ups and downs and difficulties of starting a company to that point where you're all of a sudden you turn around and you're Drew Houston. And let me tell you, Drew Houston wasn't Drew Houston until a certain amount of time. When you first met him, he was like, is this guy the next Bill Gates? Well, it's not so easy to tell. That's part of what we try to do at Y Combinator and Imagine K12, is to try to look at these kids mostly, not always, but mostly, who have an idea and who could turn into the next Drew Houston, or Brian Chesky, or Mark Zuckerberg.
That's great. So Rob in San Mateo has a question over email, and you alluded to this a little bit. What are the key things YC looks for in accepting companies? And I know there's a lot of great resources online about how to apply and all that sort of stuff, but you've been in that room, debating, should we take A or B or both of them or none of them? Like, how does that process work? Give us a little insight into the process.
Well, let me tell you about the process first,
okay.
Because there's nothing secret about it. The process is there's an online application, as I mentioned, and we look at the applications and we, through an internal review process, winnow them down from thousands to several hundred, and those several hundred come and interview with us in Mountain View at Y Combinator, or if this is Imagine K12 in Redwood City with Imagine K12. And we talk to the founders, and after a short conversation with the founders, we make a call as to whether this company has the possibility of getting financing, of maybe potentially being the next big company in either Edtech or in technology with YC.
And you make that call on the spot.
And we make that call on the spot,
like
and we
right
make
after.
it based on a number of things, but more than anything else, it's on the founders. And it's whether we can create a belief system around those founders being able not just to survive the difficulties, but really having enough deep understanding of what they're trying to do, and to be able to demonstrate that to us at the same time as us believing when aspects of what they think they believe are proven wrong, or when someone slaps them down real hard and they end up on the ground curled up in a fetal position, they get back up again and keep on going at the company and figuring out a way to be successful. And we try to make that determination about the resilience and the ability of the founders in front of us to think broadly and take a shot and keep on going, and then think narrowly and figure out what the problem they have to solve is, and then really be able to go after a market and be successful.
That's great.
And those aren't very specific answers, I know, but I can't do any better.
No, I think it's great, and I mean I do think that determination or resiliency is like one of the most important things in any startup. I mean, you've been there, right?
Doing a startup's hard, it's really hard.
You get punched in the face every day, and I tell people it's definitely a roller coaster ride. There are days where you feel great, and especially when you're the CEO, and it's a little bit of a lonely spot to be. You want to show strength to everybody. You're in control. Everything's going fine. Oh, the investors, everything's great. But
then you go into the bathroom and have a crying fit. God, no, it's doing a startup. I always say is the absolute best thing you can ever possibly do in your life, and the hardest.
Yeah, no, I agree. But the rewards are so awesome as well. And when those great days happen, like getting to meet Steve Jobs or getting acquired, or
sometimes it's just getting a customer, and
a customer.
I got to tell you one of the things that gives Imagine K12 companies the highest high is we tell them, okay, do something that's a little different here. When you create your software, put a little OLARC widget on your page and put your cell phone in it. Because watch what happens. And it's like, there's this amazing thing that happens where something doesn't work quite right, and there's a teacher there, and the teacher looks at this thing and there's a phone number. And they call the phone number, and someone answers and say yes, and the teacher says, well, I have a problem, and say, oh yeah, that's my company, I founded it. Yeah. And then they say, what's the problem? And the teacher tells them, they say, hang on a second, and you hear some typing, and then it's fixed. Yeah. And the teacher hangs up and goes, wow, that's different. And that's, I mean, in some ways that's enough for that day, right?
Absolutely. Well, and closing that loop is so important. If you can do it in literally seconds, like you just described.
I mean, it's not always that way.
Yeah. Well, in bigger companies, right? It's days, weeks, years in some cases, right?
Teachers are used to is they go to the IT dude somewhere and say, my submission didn't work.
Yeah, if you can do that instantly.
Okay, fill out this form in triplicate, and we'll get back to you in 6 months.
No, that's awesome. Well, a little insight into the workings of YC. Here's another email from Sharon in San Francisco. What's it like being acquired by Apple? Did they approach you or did you approach them? We talked about that a little bit. Any lessons learned and selling and integrating into those environments? And I guess you could speak from the Yahoo and the the Yahoo or Apple situation as well.
Yeah, lots of lessons learned. I've been party to quite a number of acquisitions, both being acquired and acquiring, and being an advisor to companies who were being acquired. Getting bought by Apple was great. That, actually, almost every aspect of that was kind of magic. We heard they were going to be so tough during the negotiations, and they were just pussycats. And it was because Steve Jobs said, just get this done, and there was competition from other parties. Right? Google wanted to buy us too, and they wanted to get it done, and they were great. The head of corp dev at Apple, a guy named Adrian Perica, is a great guy, and he was fantastic. And throughout the process, everyone was completely professional, and they dealt with the company and the issues that we had as we went through the always a relatively complex transition for a company to be standalone, independent, and all of a sudden to be part of a behemoth like Apple, one of the biggest companies in the world. But one lesson is make sure, whether you're a big company or a small company, understand what you're going to do with your integration in advance, and then just make it happen and go hard and fast. And that's what Apple does. They say this is the way it's going to be, and they get everyone in the places they're supposed to be, and they rock it. And there's a lot of ways to go wrong doing that.
Yep.
It's still true that most acquisitions fail, especially big ones, which is why until Beats, Apple had never done a really big acquisition. It's really hard to make that integration right.
The biggest, right, that they've done in a while?
Biggest they've ever done, I think.
Wow. So you made a point in there about Steve really wanted to get it done, and in my experience, when you know that and when that happens, that is just such a
at Apple that
game
was clarifying.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah, well, it just cuts through. I remember when AOL bought when. We had heard, I forget the guy's name now, but he was sort of the notorious AOL acquisition guy, and we had heard stories about him throwing tantrums and banging on the table and going nuts.
None of that.
And when we found out that somebody above him had said, "Look, no games this time. Just get it done." It just made life so much easier.
Cuts through any potential red tape. There's always issues that lawyers will come up with. That's kind of their job.
Yeah.
And Mitch is Mitch? No, Mitch is.
No, it's coming soon. Coming soon.
But that's their job is to find issues and make sure that everyone's behind is covered appropriately, and that bad things can happen later. And so, at some point you run into a hard negotiating point, and every time we did, we managed to push through it with no problem.
Yeah. No, that's great. So once again, this is an interactive show, and we want to hear from you and try and help you out. You can call us toll-free at 1-844-4-FOUNDER. You can email us help@founderline.com, and you can also tweet to @founderline, and we'll see if we can help you out. So I want to take a moment to talk a little bit about our sponsors. We have two fabulous sponsors who make this show possible, and that's Orrick and Ustream. I'll start with Ustream. We do this live show that hopefully many of you are watching live over the web right now, and that wouldn't be possible without our great partner at Ustream. When we originally approached them, we approached Brad, who's the CEO, and he heard a little bit about what we were doing, thought it was great to help out the entrepreneurial community, and hooked us up with a bunch of people on his team who have been amazing, and we still are in touch with them regularly. We're actually taking FounderLine on the road to Europe this summer, and we've been working through some issues about how are we going to handle that. So if you have any doubt about who to work with, Ustream is the best, and I'd highly encourage you to go and check them out. You can go to ustream.com and or actually ustream.tv or ustream.com. Either one works, and I'm sure they'll be willing to help you out. I'd also like to thank Orrick, Mitch Zuklie, who's the chairman and CEO there. We go way back working on multiple companies together. And, you know, when you're building a startup, you want to have advisors who can help you out. And legal is one place where you don't want to fool around. They're gonna have seen so many more deals than you would have seen in so many more situations, whether it's a partnership that you're working on, or an acquisition, or hiring and firing of employees, or whatever might be going on. And to have somebody who you can pick up the phone and reach within a few hours or minutes, depending on the situation, who can help you out with those things, it's just great to have someone who knows what they're doing. The team over at Orrick is the best. I've worked with a bunch of people over there, and if you want to find out more about Orrick, you can go to orrick.com and get in touch with them. So, now it's time for something we call Ask the Lawyer, and this is a segment we've been doing the first couple shows now, and we're very lucky to have Mitch Zuklie, who I mentioned is the chairman and CEO of Orrick, with us today. Mitch, welcome to FounderLine. How are you?
Doing great, Joe. How are you?
Great. We've got Geoff here with us, and you know, today I thought it'd be interesting to go through a little bit on the mergers and acquisitions side. And Mitch and I talked about this earlier in the week. And you know, we've got Mitch on the legal side, Geoff and I on sort of the investor and entrepreneur side. And you know, recently there's been a ton of activity in the M&A space. We talked about Beats a little bit, WhatsApp, Nest, a bunch of really big acquisitions. And most of the time people are focused on, you know, the acquisition price, but there's an aspect of acquisitions that is equally important to the team, the founders and the employees, and it's what's known as the escrow and the earnout. And so thought it'd be great, Mitch, if you could start off, maybe walk us through some of the basics of how an acquisition escrow works, and then we'll chat a little bit about it.
Thrilled to, Joe. So, you know, the very common provision, I'd say 95% of all transactions involving technology companies involve some form of deferred payout. And the two flavors of that are escrows and earnouts. An escrow simply means that a certain percentage of the deal consideration will be held by the acquirer, well, generally by the acquirer, and will not be paid out unless certain conditions are met. In this case, in most cases, it's that all the reps and warranties remain true and correct. As I said, about 95% of the deals that we see have those. It may be higher than that year to year. And the general size of an escrow is somewhere between 10 and 15% of the deal value. And then very typically, there's a debate about whether escrow is an exclusive remedy, and I'll get into that separately in a second. But back to the overview, a separate kind of a thing is an earnout. And an earnout's a situation in which, in order to get paid a certain amount more, there is some sort of a metric that must be accomplished in order for there to be a formulaic payout. So, for example, a revenue target, an earnings or an EBITDA target, or some other type of a metric like a product launch or unit sales, etc. And earnouts are much less common. You see them probably a third of all deals. I'd say that they're much more common in life sciences deals, like medical device deals, in which case I think you frankly see them in like 80% of the time. But they're much less common in non-life science transactions. So that's a quick overview of how an earnout or an escrow works. And maybe Joe or Geoff, you want to add something to the definition or description?
Well, Mitch, Yeah, the only thing I would say to that is maybe in slightly more lay terms, the way I always thought about an escrow is if something you did causes the acquiring company to get sued, the escrow's there to pay the money so that they don't have to, and so it comes out of your pocket instead of theirs. And for example, when you're in the music space, there are some fairly litigious people around.
Really?
So
Right.
there's always when Mitch talks about the reps and warranties, that's what he's talking about. It's like you said, oh no, everything we did is ours. No, couldn't possibly be sued by anyone, and they could win. But that it actually doesn't really matter if you get sued. They're going to take the money out of the escrow. It turned out that and I was happy about this. I think the escrow that I was involved with that had the most risk associated was indeed LaLa, but it was 18 months, fairly standard, and and I can't remember, but I think it was 15%, and it almost all paid out, I think.
Great. And what about earnouts? You ever been part of an earnout?
Never have been part of an earnout for myself personally. I would say the one thing I'll say about an earnout, if anyone ever gets in that situation, is do your utmost. And by the way, an earnout, the thing about an earnout is it really, whether there's an earnout or not, is mostly determined by sort of how much power you have in the negotiation, right?
Yeah.
What kind of standing you have in that negotiation, because it's always better to get your money up front if you can. There's a lot of attractive things about an earnout for an acquiring company, obviously, but what you want to do is put yourself in a situation. You want to do your utmost so that the metrics that you have to hit in order to get your earnout are as much under your control as possible. And that's tough at a big company because they could change their strategy, and you have to be very, very careful that, they say, well, we don't want to go after that space anymore, and so you can't hit your metrics. So you need to be really thoughtful about that up front.
Well, and I've lived through a situation where, it wasn't necessarily in your control. Say you're depending on the acquiring company's sales force, and they're not focusing on, that exact product right now or something. And that's tough. That's a really tough situation. So, So Mitch, any thoughts on, as you're going through the process, things to look out for, or best practices to make sure that you set up the escrow and the earnouts as advantageously as possible?
Sure. So I think your general admonitions, Joe and Geoff, around earnouts are right. Very frequently when you see a dispute, almost always a dispute comes out, I think, around an earnout, quite frankly, and who as you both pointed out, is able to control the decision that's the one that's determinative on whatever the condition is, whether it's revenue or EBITDA or product launch or unit sales. When you get acquired, you frequently give up control of those things, and yet your ability to earn the earnout is dependent on hitting certain goals, and so that tension is a big one. And similarly, there's some questions about the taxation of earnouts and whether they're ordinary income or not. And so, in general, I try to avoid those earnouts if at all possible. They're a recipe, in my view, for disputes down the road. By contrast, I think escrows are, of course, pretty standard. Yeah. And I think where the action is on the escrows is whether or not the escrow is the exclusive remedy. So, in other words, if a problem comes up, can the acquirer say, to the seller, hey, wait a minute, I'm going to go after only this escrow amount, or are there certain areas, certain reps that are so fundamental that you should be able to go after more than the amount that's escrowed? And that's where the action typically is, Joe, the fight about what's carved out of escrow as an exclusive remedy. And so it's all about what happens if there's a case of fraud or willful misrepresentation, or are certain representations so fundamental, like capitalization or IP, that they get carved out of those limitations in escrow. And I would work hard with a competent advisor in a deal to really make sure that you do everything you can to use escrow as an exclusive remedy, and to make sure you limit those exceptions to the very minimum. As a practical matter, you're not going to be able to to get away with making a willful misrepresentation or fraud and say, oh, you can't come after us. But beyond that, the numbers of limitations should really be limited, that you allow yourself to go beyond the escrow. Effectively, you would put yourself in a situation where you might distribute a bunch of money you don't have. So try very hard to whittle down that list and to make sure that the escrow is the exclusive remedy.
That's great advice. Yeah, I mean, that's where most of our conversations have always been around the escrow. I mean, there's sort of three things you negotiate. There's that, there's the length of the escrow, how much time after the acquisition you get paid out. And sometimes they're broken into tranches, and you'll get paid some after a year and more after 2 years, sort of dual, Mitch probably has the correct name for that, but sort of a dual escrow. And also the percentage of the total consideration that goes into the escrow. As a founder, obviously you want that to be, so as a founder, just so we're clear, if you're a founder, you want as short an escrow as possible, as small a percentage of the consideration to go into the escrow, and as exclusive, make it as exclusive as possible for a remedy. That's what you want to negotiate for, and that's what you should be looking for when you're talking about the escrow.
Great. Well, hopefully people find that advice helpful. There's lots of activity going on in that space right now, and a lot of companies getting acquired. And I know, again, having a great lawyer who can help you through those processes, because they've seen so many of these, is really critical. So thanks to Mitch Zuklie from Orrick for joining us. Mitch, we'll talk to you again next week.
All right, Joe, that's a wrap. Thanks a lot. Jeff, good talking with you.
You too, Mitch. Thanks.
All right.
Bye-bye.
So that was Ask the Lawyer with Mitch Zuklie from Orrick. And once again, if you want to reach us, call 1-844-4FOUNDER. Email us to help@founderline.com or tweet @founderline, and we'll see if we can help you out. So that was cool. Let's get back to some questions. We've got a number of emails coming in, and
yeah, I was going to say though, it's interesting that we were talking about escrows and earnouts. The thing about those in an acquisition is you got like those aren't the set of questions you tend to get. Yeah. You tend to get more of, how do I get acquired, or what do I do if someone wants to acquire me, or should I accept this acquisition? And once you get to the escrow and earnout conversation, you're kind of, at that point, dotting the I's and crossing the T's.
You're in good shape
for an acquisition. It's very unusual. In fact, I've never seen it that, well, let me be careful about this. I've never seen a deal get blown up over escrow. Earnouts, as Mitch pointed out, are really touchy, and sometimes a deal could get blown up over an earnout, and you have to be very careful. I've seen some egregious earnout requests from companies, and you know at some point it's not worth your time if so much of the consideration is in the earnout and you have little control over it. Then it's essentially an acqui-hire.
Yeah, makes sense. Let me ask you. I'd imagine a large percentage of YC and maybe imagine K12 companies. Exit possibility for them is some sort of acquisition. So you guys must see a lot of these acquisitions going on. In my experience, it always seems that when the bigger companies come chasing you, you're in a much better position than if you're trying to go after them and trying to sell yourself to, a bigger company. So what advice, to your point, we can't cover everything in every topic, but what advice would you give to a founder? Maybe, the company's going okay, not, going through the roof. Maybe they're having trouble raising the next round, and they're starting to look at, okay, how do we, bring this plane down safely and get a reasonable exit for everybody who's involved. How do you help those people out? What sorts of things would you say?
My biggest piece of advice there is that they be extremely thoughtful about it, and don't just sort of extemporize, and you're meeting with the company, say, oh, why don't you buy us? Be very thoughtful about who the potential acquirers might be. The best position to put yourself in is always to have multiple potential suitors.
Exactly.
You want to be the prettiest girl at the dance. You want to have a full card. You want to have everyone looking at you. And then you have at least the potential to maximize the value of the company. And the other thing I'll say is, if an acquisition is right for the company, try to put your company and the product that you're selling and the user base in the right position for that acquisition. And lastly, I'll say, for me anyway, it's really important that you take all the stakeholders into account when you look at an acquisition. And you try to do what's best for not just the investors, but also the employees and for the customers. Yep. As much as you possibly can. And you won't always be able to do that. And I've definitely failed at certain aspects of that myself in acquisitions I've been party to. But I think that should be your goal. And that's why I say try to be very thoughtful about it and think about all those considerations when you go into it.
Yeah, it's really hard to get the right outcome for all of those constituents, right? Because you never know, well, maybe the acquirer buys you and then shuts down the product, right? And then
for example,
you feel like you've betrayed all of your customers who put their early faith in you, right? Exactly. And or they don't take the entire employee team. They say, well, we want most of you guys, but not everybody. And so those are tough situations. But if you're in that situation where you're you need to be acquired and the options are limited, you kind of have to optimize for best possible outcome. With you're not going to get it perfect, but you just do the best that you can. Yep. Yeah. All right. Well, let's see. We've got some more emails coming in here, and I hear we were having some phone issues, so hopefully those are cleared up. So feel free to call if you want. This one is an email from Pascal in Pleasanton. Why are there so many funded startups that don't seem to have a good business plan? What are the key things that VCs look for? And I'm guessing what Pascal, I think that's a male name, what he's getting at.
Does it have an E on the end of it?
It does not. It does not.
Then it's male.
Okay, so I think what he's getting at is a lot of companies who build products that maybe like Twitter, right? There was no business plan when they originally started doing that, or maybe Snapchat or one of these other companies. Consumer, high growth. So what are the key things VCs are looking for there?
Well, I'll just point out that it might be hard to tell what a good business plan is. Peter Thiel's famous Venn diagram of the companies you want to invest in is, if you imagine a Venn diagram where the left circle is ideas that seem bad, and the right circle is ideas that are good, and you look at the very small intersection of those two things, those are the companies you want to invest in.
Yeah.
So, let me give you the canonical example, which is Airbnb. This is a company that was selling the idea of putting together a business where you have airbeds for people to sleep on at conferences when there's overflow for hotel rooms. Now, most people who heard that thought it was a stupid idea, that it would never grow big and it wouldn't go anywhere. It just turned out that they were just adjacent to an idea which was enormous, which was this idea of a sharing economy where you become the biggest hotel in the entire world. And if you can see that, then you can see your way to participating in a multi-billion-dollar company. So Pascal might have looked at that company and said, well, that's a bad business plan. How could they possibly get funded? That's what makes seed investing hard, is because you can always find a reason to believe that this is a bad idea. Yeah. And the trick is to see the nugget, that kernel of brilliance, or close to brilliance, that the top founder that you're investing in will find, and sort of set them free to do that. And I think that's why startups that you might think seem stupid or have a bad business plan actually do get funded, because there's that dream, that glint in the eye of the founder and the investor.
Somebody believes. As you said earlier, the investor needs to fall in love. Right. And I remember seeing Airbnb. They were at the Plug and Play Tech Center down in Sunnyvale, and I forget what it was, some conference or pitch thing, and I just thought, these guys are nuts. Yeah, and I don't think it was quite the inflatable air mattresses. Maybe they had just started to evolve a little bit, but what I said was, I don't want to sleep on somebody's sofa, or in their guest room, that just for me personally. And so I like then thought it was crazy, but obviously, I don't know who picked it out at YC. It was YC, right?
Yeah. I don't think Airbnb would have made it without YC at the time. I think Brian would agree with that. They were in trouble, and they kind of found themselves at YC. It's not that we take credit for doing what the guys have done there, but they sort of found their mojo. and it's like, from moving on from YC, they've just been on rampage.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw them before they got into YC. They had already started, right?
Oh, they were around for a couple of years.
And then got into YC, and that's when it took off. That's
but
great.
They were tough. They were tough. They weren't going away. That was what was amazing about them. You look at those guys and say, wow.
Again,
they're so tough they made cereal to survive.
That's right. I remember. What was it? The Obama O's and the something. Was it McCain?
Yeah, Captain McCain's.
Captain McCain's. That's funny.
Okay.
All right, we've got our regular. We have an email from Larry in Yuba City, and his question is: I spoke with a colleague at an industry event. We are both national experts in our field. I'm not sure exactly what that is. He developed a relationship with his VC by offering to vet companies that the VC was looking at in our industry. Was he just lucky, or is this idea generally valid? If so, how would you go about finding investors looking for this type of assistance? Interesting question.
Well, investors are always looking for that kind of assistance.
Yep.
You know, there's this program that's been around for many, many years called the Entrepreneur in Residence, which is usually an operating guy, a guy like you or me, perhaps, maybe more in the prime of our careers, who finished with a company and are looking for new things. And VCs consider them experts, and they bring them in and say, look at these deals for me and tell me what you think. And from the founder or the EIR's perspective, it's an opportunity to perhaps find your next thing.
Yeah.
So look, those are usually almost always done with personal relationships. And without developing a personal relationship with the VC, it's very hard to become their expert, because so much of this is based on trust. They have to trust and know you. Now, if you're a worldwide expert in a particular field that's relevant to a VC, that's something I'm sure they would listen to. So you just need to network and get a contact with, figure out who the right VCs are in that field, and find VCs want to talk. They're out there talking to people, so find them, talk to them, send them emails, find them at conferences, send them a business plan, whatever it is.
Watch their tweets.
That's what their job is, to be out there paying attention to what's available. So yeah, watch their tweets, tweet to them. Why not?
Yeah, that's great. All right, so speaking of tweets, we have one from Chris. The question is, what was the most compelling recent entrepreneurial pitch and why? So, seen anything recently? Are you guys going through applications right now, or?
Yeah.
And maybe you can't talk about some of them.
So yeah, it's hard to say that, because Imagine K12 works on a rolling application basis, and I would obviously hesitate to pick one out of many. And we've just chosen the Y Combinator summer of 2014 batch, which is actually kicking off next week.
Oh, wow.
We've seen lots and lots of, I think the quality of the companies keeps on getting better and better, and we've seen compelling pitches that range from new sorts of medical devices. There was a company in the previous batch that thinks they might have a way to create a new kind of way to create a vaccination for AIDS. We have companies that are in the enterprise space, companies creating amazing hardware that you look at and that are just extremely impressive. And yet we have companies creating new kinds of services that you wouldn't have expected, from selling used cars to selling used furniture. So, which is the best pitch I've seen? I've seen too many, and I would really hesitate to call anyone out.
No, that sounds good. All right, let's see. We have an email from John in San Francisco, and the email says, "How has YC changed now that Sam Altman is in charge?" Interesting question. Hope it doesn't get you in too much trouble.
Well, my goal is that YC changes as little as possible in the ways that matter most, which is that we are the best place in the world to help founders find success. And I hope that never changes. That's why YC became YC, because that was PG's mantra. It's about the founders, and it's about making companies successful.
Yeah.
And I don't think we will change. No, I think we'll change in ways around the periphery. We'll try to figure out how to scale better, how to make more companies successful. I think we'll perhaps get a little more rigorous in how we think about things and how we track things. But I would say that the summer 2014 class will run very much as we run classes over the last 9 years. And so my fundamental answer was that change will come to YC. It will come where we, I think in a very deliberate way, and Sam is leading this obviously, think that change ought to come, and will come because it will make us more effective as an organization. It will make our founders more likely to find success.
That's great. You being part of two different organizations like this, Imagine K12, I believe, is a little bit smaller, right, in terms of the number of partners who are involved and the staff and everything else. So you must see quite a variety of different challenges between those two companies. Any insight into how those organizations are different? I mean, you're applying sort of the YC model to the education technology space.
We're like YC was, 6 years ago, in a sense. But we have the enormous benefit of having inside knowledge of YC that we can bring to bear on the problems that we run into.
Yeah.
And I can call up PG and say, this is happening, what should we do? Or talk to Jessica or Sam and say, how should we handle this? And and YC has always been there to help Imagine K12. In fact, there's been a number of companies that have actually done YC and Imagine K12, sometimes simultaneously, sometimes not quite simultaneously, depending how they were running, and it's been great. Panorama Education is the most recent company, made somewhat famous because they got angel investment from Mark Zuckerberg. Great, unbelievable founders out of Yale, who before they graduated from Yale had a multi-$100,000 run rate. Were just amazing founders, and they did both programs. So yeah, I mean, we're smaller. Now we're going to do as many as 20 companies at a time, but YC does upwards of 70 or 80 companies at a time, so a lot bigger.
Wow, that's great. Well, we've got time. We've got about a minute left, so time for one last question. The question is, how do I find a co-founder? So I've been through this, with an idea and trying to find something. What advice would you give people? You probably see this with people coming in. Maybe a business person comes in with an idea, but they don't have that technical co-founder or whatever it might be. What would you suggest?
We always recommend trying to found a company with someone you know well. It is certainly not a death sentence for a company to have people who don't know each other very well. And it's certainly not a death sentence for a marriage, for an arranged marriage, when people don't know each other well. Yeah. But it makes it a lot harder because founding a company and doing a company is really hard. And any fault lines that can exist will exist. And if you don't know someone well, it can be very hard to get past those. And if a founding team breaks up, that is probably the classic failure mode for a company. So it's much better to have someone whose ins and outs you know and can deal with. But in any event, you want to try to find someone who's as complementary to you as possible, who can bring you up when you're down, who has skills if you're not technical, who can build things and be technical. Yeah. Yeah. If you hate talking to customers, can be out there talking to customers. By the way, even if you hate talking to customers, learn how to talk to customers. But yeah, finding the right founder is the most important thing you can possibly do starting your company, before anything else, before even deciding what to found. And there is no magic formula, but know them as well as you possibly can before making that leap.
That's great. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but Geoff, thank you for being our guest. Great job today. You can follow Geoff on Twitter. His handle is GRalston. And tune in again next week for another episode of FounderLine. Our guest will be Robert Stevens, who is the founder of the Geek Squad and former CTO of Best Buy. Robert's a great friend of mine. We've known each other for a number of years, going back to his days at Best Buy, and I'm sure he'll have a lot of great stories for us about starting the company with $200 and all sorts of other things. That's next week. It'll be a great show. It'll be at 5 p.m. Pacific time on Thursday. Thank you once again to our amazing sponsors, Orrick and Ustream. We can't do this without you. thank you again. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @FounderLine. You can also, during the week, send us questions to either Twitter or to our email address, help@founderline.com. If you go to our website, you can subscribe to updates we send out weekly, and also look at the previous episodes, which are usually up there on Friday. You can check out our podcast on iTunes. We just launched that last week, so go check that out. And we'll keep adding things as we can to the site, and doing as much as we can for entrepreneurs and founders. That's it for this week. Thanks for watching. Here's to the crazy ones, and we'll see you again next Thursday.